Alright, so now we're going to do an open seam which is pin stitched back. So instead of having the overlocking showing, because the overlocking's there, instead of having it showing, which, you know, especially if you don't have a perfect color match for the fabric, it doesn't always look that great. So this technique is just a really nice way of finishing off the seams on the inside, really easy and looks good. So what we need to do is just overlock both of the edges first. And then we're going to sew the seam, and then we're going to pin stitch back. And with this way as well, this is just calico, so we've got a 1.5 centimeter seam. If you were using a thicker fabric, you could potentially, and your seams were straight, it's a bit trickier on curves, but if you've got lots of straight seams and you're making a coat or something that's unlined, you could have a 2 centimeter seam and even up to a 2.5 centimeter seam allowance, depending on how thick your fabric is. And if you wanted a smaller edge here as well, you could even take one of the threads out of the overlocking, so you've got a smaller overlocking too, but that's something that you can talk to somebody about. So here I've got my two pieces. I've overlocked both of them. This is the nice side, or the top of the overlocking facing up. You can see the difference between the wrong side and the right side of the overlocking. So right sides together. And this is a bit weird, but because this is in imperial, when we line up to find a 1.5 centimeter point on the lines here, it turns out to be the 1 on the 1/2 inch. So that's what we're going to line the edge of our fabric up with, that 1. Let's do a back tack, and then what I'm doing is just making sure that these two edges are together and that both of these edges line up with the 1 there. I'm not looking at the needle, that's going to do its job anyway. Okay, so we've stitched our seam, and now we're going to, you could press that open now if you wanted to, but it's not really that necessary just yet. And now we're going to fold back the overlocking. And you can see the overlocking, it just sits against the stitch line there. So that's why really important when you're overlocking not to chop any of that seam allowance off, because then you start, eating into the garment. And if you folded this back and it actually went over the seam, then when you tried to press that seam open, you'd get a pleat in there, and so it'd just be really thick and lumpy and it wouldn't sit properly. So really important to get all of your measurements correct and to not chop anything off with the overlocker. And then the other side. Okay, so there's our seam stitched back. Now I just give this a good press, and that's our pin stitched open seam.